Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson. Fans of the AWA, you are in for a real treat. My friend Joyce Poston has just released her book titled My Ringside Seat to the AWA. Joyce writes about her personal experiences with wrestlers such as Nick Bockwinkel, Lord Alfred Hayes, Baron Von Raschke, and others. Joyce also has published many photos from her collection that you will not see anywhere else. Order today by email at joyce.poston@gmail.com. Payment is through PayPal. The book is only $20 plus $6 shipping and handling. International orders, please email Joyce for shipping charge. Folks, run, don't walk to your keyboard, and order today. And enjoy the podcast. My guest today has authored or co-authored 6 books, including his latest book, Keirn Chronicles Volume One, The Fabulous Wrestling Life of Steve Keirn, and is a contributor to several publications as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Ian Douglas. Ian, thanks for coming on.
Brian, thanks so much for having me. I don't know what I did that warranted an invite, but I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, let me tell you, I've read a couple of your books that you've co-authored with Dan Severn, and I'm going to get the one with Steve, Bugsy, or B. Brian Blair. You've done that one with him, and I'm just your contributions and stuff. I mean, I was just really impressed. Brian Blair's book is a great book.
Well, thank you.
It has a lot of fascinating facts and life stories of his. And I'm sure doing these books sometimes probably can be a little bit challenging because they've really got to kind of sit back and remember things or you have to dig it up somehow. And so let's just kind of jump into that a little bit. What's that process like when you're doing a book on a wrestler? Really, is it quite challenging more than some of the other things you've done, or what's that like for you? Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's thewfia.org, and become a member today.
It can be challenging at times. The way to make it as simple as possible and to eliminate some of the challenge is just to take a very patient approach to it, that you don't need to, you're certainly not going to get it done in one interview session. You're not going to get it done in 6 interview sessions. And it's tell yourself that we're going to speak every Tuesday for 6 months for 1 hour, and we're going to have a good time, and we're going to talk through all of these memories, and then we'll put a draft together. We'll see what it looks like, and we'll see if any of that information, once you see it on the printed page, if it dredges up any further memories that you want to have in there. And so really it's just a matter of not forcing the issue, giving everything room to breathe, and just making sure that by the time the finished product is out, it is what everyone envisioned it would be, and it contains every element that you wanted it to contain.
Yeah. Hey, now I'm sure you have interviewed probably some of his family members or their family members, if they want to talk about it. Is that a little more, I don't know, I want to say difficult, but challenging, or are they more willing sometimes or not, or what's that kind of like?
Well, it can depend. So you occasionally are dealing with wives who, quite frankly, aren't thrilled at what their husbands did in the business, whether they were
Yeah.
married to the wrestler at the time, or they married the wrestler after the fact and don't want them
Yeah.
getting into every dalliance they had on the road, because it's not what they want their children and grandchildren reading about, and it's not what you want your husband to be immortalized for.
Yeah.
And I absolutely understand that perspective. So yeah, there can be some challenges there. And
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, if anything, I lean more toward the side of asking them, now, are you sure you want to leave this in here? 30 years from now, is this what you want to be remembered for?
Yeah.
I'm in favor of pruning as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I could see that definitely. So, all right, Ian, we're gonna go back a little bit and talk a little bit about, if we could, your childhood. You grew up in Michigan.
I did.
Let's talk about your childhood growing up, and what was that like for you and your schooling?
Oh wow. I had a very normal suburban Metro Detroit childhood. Born in Southfield, Michigan, but my earliest years were spent in or on Piedmont, so 5 Mile Road and Southfield Freeway, more or less, in Detroit. Moved to Southfield. I'm a proud product of the Southfield public school system, and yeah, then went to the University of Michigan. But as far as wrestling is concerned, it was when I was 7 years old that WrestleMania 3 came to the Detroit area. That was a big deal. Just
Mhm.
ahead of that, just ahead of WrestleMania 3, I started watching wrestling on television for the first time. I saw Macho Man Randy Savage. He was a heel. I did not care. I thought he was the greatest thing I'd ever seen in my young life. And I was a diehard supporter of the Macho Madness for the entire run of his career. I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah.
That so that
Wow.
so it so if I was going to say what turned me into a wrestling fan, if I was going to encapsulate it down to one name, it would be Macho Man Randy Savage.
Yeah. WrestleMania 3, Pontiac Silverdome. Yeah.
Mhm.
That had the indoor attendance record for a long, I don't know if it still does or not, but I know it held it for a long time.
Well, and depending on who you ask, there are those who say there were technically only 78,000 paid in attendance. I don't, so honestly, I don't know how legitimate the attendance record was, or when it was officially broken, if it was in fact 78,000. So who
Yeah.
knows? But it was certainly a huge crowd. We can agree on
It was
that.
a full house. We know that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So you talk about becoming a pro wrestling fan. Now, as you got into college, uh, so we're talking probably late 90s, early
Late 90s.
2000s.
Yeah, late 90s.
So Monday Night Wars, were you a fan of that? Were you a watcher?
I was. I was like everyone else, switching channels between WWE or WWF and WCW, back and
Yeah.
forth. But pre Monday Night Wars, I can't omit the fact that when I was 10 years old, I visited my uncles in the Bahamas, stayed with them for a week. And my uncle said, my Uncle David knew I was a wrestling fan. He said, I'm taking you to
Mhm.
go see wrestling. And I said, that's fantastic. The only wrestling I was aware of in existence was WWF. And when I'd been flipping through cable, occasionally I'd spy like Jim Crockett Promotions,
Mhm.
WCW. Um, but he said, I'm taking you to go see Dusty Rhodes. And I honestly had no clue who Dusty Rhodes was.
Wow.
Embarrassed to say, I did not know who Dusty Rhodes was.
Uh,
And so he took me to Nassau Stadium, which is I mean, it is a restaurant with a courtyard where like where all of the boxing was done in, I
Yeah.
mean, it's the most prominent boxing venue in the Bahamas at the time. They did basketball there, they did roller skating, they did a whole bunch of other stuff, but there was a wrestling ring set up in the back. And I got to see Steve Keirn, and I got to see Mike Graham, and I got to see Scott Hall. I got to see Scott Levy wrestling as
Wow.
Scotty Flamingo, who would later be Raven, and I got to see the Nasty Boys against the Terminator and Johnny Ace, who we all, of course, know as John Laurinaitis. And
Yeah.
I got to see Dusty Rhodes wrestle Big Steel Man, aka US Steel, aka Tugboat, aka Typhoon, in Fred Ottman in the main event. So that was it made quite the impression on me in my young life, and I always wanted to know more about wrestling in the Bahamas. So that would be
Yeah.
that's a thread we'll probably need to follow later on.
All right. Let's talk about, Ian, if we could, your writing. So, we'll talk about the books here in a few minutes, but I want to ask you what got you interested in writing? Because, like I said, I've read your stuff. You're very good, and I know you don't give yourself enough credit because we talked before this. But what got you interested in writing?
Did you ever wonder what could have been with the AWA had things gone differently? Had their fortunes gone differently? Had certain wrestlers not left and perhaps more money would have been at the disposal of the Ganyas? Well, wonder no further. You can go to Brad Drake's YouTube channel and experience the 1987 Supermod for yourself, as Brad Drake starts off in May 1987 along with Greg Gagne, Baron von Raschke, Vern Gagne himself, Nick Bockwinkel, Larry Zbyszko, Kurt Hennig, and a slew of others as he plays and saves the AWA.
I think because, well, first of all, because it's not that I wasn't good at math and science. It's that, I mean, I had AP courses not in math. I was on the AP track in science, but I just didn't have the interest and the drive. And I just generally thought that I showed more promise in AP English Lit, those sorts of classes. And also I recognized in college that studying for the exams, like, yeah, that was all well and good, but I really got excited about doing the research for the papers that were the writing requirement of the course, no matter what the course was. I always liked the idea of, okay, this is a puzzle. How can I piece this together most effectively and make it as entertaining as possible? Even if it's just a 4 pages double spaced on something to do with the history of the the Korean immigrant experience.
Okay.
I wanted to make it as thorough and engaging as possible, even if it was for an audience of one.
Wow. Interesting. I love it. I think it's great. So we're going to fast forward now. I want to mention too that you were an athlete, a swimmer.
Yeah.
Well, from what I read, you're excellent, at least a very good swimmer.
I was okay.
And yeah, well, okay.
My
Don't give
wife's
yourself
better.
enough credit, like I said. But also, after you were in college, you worked for a congressman in the Michigan House of Representatives,
I did.
Andy Dillon.
Andy
What was
Dillon.
that experience? What was that experience like for you?
That experience was valuable for several reasons. One of the reasons was because I was asked to write a lot of his materials, whether it was his speech for inauguration, or if he needed to contribute something to State of the State, or if he needed to contribute something for his lit drops that were going to everyone in his district, or if he needed to contribute a special letter for a program, for an event. like, and I got to play around with a lot of those materials and make those entertaining in some cases, always with his sign off and his approval. But
Mhm.
you know, I got a lot of experience writing, essentially ghost writing for someone, and ghostwriting for someone, but also figuring out a way to convey their voice and their message through several different forms of communication. Um, and the other thing I learned in that experience, Andy Dillon, people have their opinion. People in Michigan certainly have varying opinions on him. Um, I was sitting next to him in the car almost every day, and he
Mhm.
was a genius, and he knew his stuff backwards and forwards. And um, you know, it taught me the value. It taught me that there's no substitute for actually knowing what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, it is a talent to be able to wing it sometimes and give it that appearance, but when you're face to face with someone who actually knows the real deal, and it's a debate format, you're going to get absolutely slaughtered. So it's better to do your homework and come prepared. That's what that taught me.
Was that challenging for you to convey his thoughts? I mean, was there a lot of pressure on that, or was it at first, and then you kind of like, okay, this isn't that bad as I
I,
thought?
not not really, because
Hmm.
just to give you an example of someone knowing their stuff backwards and forwards, like I might get a standard set of talk in some cases. So let's say, for instance, he had a speech that he needed to make, and it was in front of a very specific audience. Maybe it was auto workers, and so I would get a standard set of talking points from the main office, and I might dress them up in ways that fit opinions that I knew he had, and statements that I've heard him make both publicly and in private. And
Hmm.
there were cases, and I'd say 70% of the time, maybe more, where we'd be headed somewhere. I'd hand him the talking points. He'd look them over. He'd look them over. He'd smile. He'd chuckle. He'd say, "Yeah, these are great." Then he'd get up in front of the audience and completely off the cuff, having nothing to do with anything I'd written, and it would be vastly superior, because whatever he said to me in private was backed by this reservoir of knowledge that was a whole lot deeper, and he could delve into that to speak to this audience, and he didn't need what I'd prepared, and that was fine.
Oh yeah. Well, hey, at least you were the backup, I guess, right? If you needed something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose, like, if nothing else, I learned from it. I mean, these are cases where um first of all, you have the job, so you're getting paid. So you might
Hmm.
as well take the opportunity to write. And so you're getting paid to learn, and you're being paid to polish and develop your skills.
Yeah.
So, it sure beats the classroom setting where you're having to pay to acquire the knowledge. Here, I'm getting paid
Yeah.
to learn. So it's
There you go.
a lot less expensive that way.
There you go. Okay, after college, you had some numerous jobs, a reporter. Uh, let's fast forward a little bit to when you helped write Dan Severn's
Yeah.
book. What was that? Yeah, there it is. The realest guy in the room. Let's talk about that. What, Ian, I mean, to me, if I was my first one and writing about a man of his stature and working with him, one, I'd be a nervous wreck.
I was.
Two, two is like I would be thinking, how am I going to formulate all this? What was that experience like for you in working with Dan the Beast Severn?
Well, first of all, I may have been nervous in the beginning, but Dan is so laid back.
Mm.
And I quickly learned that by no means was Dan ever going to, suplex me to the ground and choke me if I Not that I was going to test that or do anything out of line, but Dan was such an easygoing guy, and he leaned on me and he trusted me a great deal. And if I asked him about certain things, or pressed him on certain things, or challenged him on certain things, he was fine with it. There was a match he had, like, just as an example, there was a match he had with Tarzan Godo. Um, I think it was for it might have been in the middle of the King of the Deathmatch tournament, the infamous King of the Deathmatch tournament that Cactus Jack and McFoley were involved in. I think there was an NWA title match inserted on that card somewhere. And Dan wrestled Tarzan Godo, and like from Dan's perspective, where he's down on the floor and he starts throwing chairs into the ring, he says, "Yeah, I took a chair and I threw it so hard that it flew clear over the ring." And okay, from his perspective on the floor, not being able to see the other side, it probably looked that way. But I went and watched the match, and I saw that it bounced in the ring and bounced like over to the other, like kind of bounced in and out. And I wrote in there like it bounced in and out. And he said, "Hey, I threw it over the ring." I said, "Dan, I went and watched it. It bounces in and goes out." And it was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I either hadn't watched it or hadn't seen it in a long, long time. But the way he
Yeah.
remembered it, it went clean over." So yeah, he was fine with things like that.
Wow. Hello, everyone. This is Brian Ferguson, the host of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I want to tell you about a new podcast out called Fouls Count Anywhere. It is a classic pro wrestling podcast that brings you the legends of wrestling with true wrestling fans Chris DiCarlo and Charlie Turner. They bring on guests that are legends in this business, and as well as wrestlers of today, promoters, referees, you name it, they have them on there, folks. And I encourage you to listen to them. If you're on YouTube, watch them. They drop every Saturday. They have their podcast. They drop it in the afternoon. So look forward to that podcast coming out. Falls Count Anywhere podcast with Chris DiCarlo and Charlie Turner. Folks, you will not be disappointed. I guarantee it. And enjoy the podcast. So, good experience. Bugsy, McGraw, kind of the same.
That Bugsy was the best. And Bugsy, that's the book that really taught me how to write a book.
Okay.
And I know that's like, because honestly, Hornswoggle's I was working on much earlier than Bugsy's, but the Bugsy experience is the one that really taught me how to book together. It taught me how to put a book together. That's one where Kenny Casanova called me up and said, "Bugsy wants to do a book. I've got Vader, Sabu, and like 3 other people I'm working on. I can't do it.
Yeah.
Can you do it?" And I said, "Well, he wrestled in Detroit. He wrestled in Florida. He wrestled in the Bahamas. I want to know more about all of those things. So yes, I would love to." Got that arranged. And we just decided we were going to talk. I think I mentioned this to you before. I mentioned this to you hyperbolically before we started recording, but
Yeah.
I believe we literally spoke every Tuesday for 6 months for about an hour, and started logging away all of these interviews. And we started this with no one made any promises about when the book was going to be released. When it's complete and it's done and everyone's satisfied with it, then we'll put it out. But in the meantime, Kenny was the one who told me that there was nothing that a publisher could do for me, like aside from mass market distribution, and some promotional stuff, that there wasn't anything a publisher could do for me that I couldn't learn to do for myself, including selecting the photos, editing the photos, doing the layout of the photos, doing the layout of the entire book, acquiring getting the barcode, doing the layout of the cover such that it is, lining up the reviewers to contribute cover quotes, and all of those sorts of things. So that was sort of a challenge Kenny laid out that pushed me and
Mhm.
taught me, like, yes, you can take ownership of every component of this thing, and now you don't have to lean on anyone else. You don't have to submit you don't have to submit a 400-page manuscript to a publisher that's going to take another year and a half to edit it, um, to edit it, to take things out that aren't to their liking, to chop it from 400 pages down to 300 pages so that it's no longer the product you originally envisioned. And
Yeah.
now you feel like you've lost another year and a half of your life waiting for this thing to come out. Whereas if you had total control, you could have put it out a week after you were happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting now. There's a lot more uh, abilities and ways to publish, and you have your own publishing firm, if I Darkstream.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's just me. But I mean,
I mean,
it's
but you've done it, so
yeah.
you
Oh yeah.
understand the process. I mean, you don't need a you're not really in need of a big publishing company to push out your book that you want to write if you have your own little thing and you're able to do it yourself. That's the beauty of, I guess, technology now. You're able to do that on your own versus paying a publishing firm or whatever X amount of dollars for every book they sell for you.
Oh,
And
absolutely. And it's the difference between being able to take home $1.50 per copy and take home $9 per copy.
exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that that's that's uh that's amazing that people are able to do that now.
Mhm.
So articles you've written some articles lately. One just came out, if I remember right, um, that you wrote. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. The latest one you just published a few days ago.
Bray Wyatt.
Bray Wyatt.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk
The,
about
the making of Bray Wyatt. Yes.
the making of Bray Wyatt. Yes, I'm
Mhm.
sorry. Apologies. I've got other things going through my head
Hey
that
man,
should have.
I didn't get to write the title for it myself, so I had to think about it.
Researching that article, the man was only 36 years old,
Mhm.
uh, had a young family, uh, part of a wrestling family, both on the Wyndham side, obviously, and Rotunda. His name is Wyndham Rotunda in real life. How was it, Ian, writing that article for you as a fan, having to
Well,
write that kind of article?
so here's the uncomfortable backstory to that article. The uncomfortable backstory is I am friends with Mike Rotunda. And when I was in Tampa finishing up Steve Keirn's book, I spent a couple nights at Steve's house. And as I say this, I'm recognizing how privileged I am. Well, let me take you through my weekend, Brian. Um,
Sure,
I
please.
I got to Tampa. I spent 2 nights at Steve Keirn's house, going through all of his photos, deciding what we wanted the cover to look like, scanning the photos, deciding what should go into the book, deciding on some final edits for his book. He drove me over to Brian Blair's house on the second night, and Brian Blair and his wife Tony took me out to dinner and dropped me back off at Steve Keirn's house, where I stayed in an awesome guest room with alligator stuff everywhere. It's fantastic. And then in the morning, woke up. Steve drove me to Brooksville and dropped me off at Mike Rotunda's house, and I hung out with Mike. And while I was there, he drove me around Brooksville. He drove me past Bray's house. Bray was out of town.
Mhm.
Drove me past Bray's house. Saw the lovely cars in his driveway. Mike was in awe of his son's possessions, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Then went back to Mike's house. I was typing up a Ringer article. We were putting the final touches on the Bahamas article that I wrote for the Ringer.
Okay.
And then Stephanie Mike's wife, Blackjack Barry's sister, Blackjack Mulligan's daughter, came home, and I said, "Hey, it would be fantastic if we could get you two on the record and put an article out about how you guys got together and the significance of the Wyndham Rotunda clan." And like right before that, Barry came over, and I interviewed Barry for this as well. So I spent the next hour and a half, like sitting at the kitchen table with the recorder and Stephanie and Mike, and we're all laughing. They're telling me the history of their whirlwind romance. It was wonderful. The next week, I called up Micah, Mike's daughter, Mike and Stephanie's daughter, and said, "Hey, if you want to come in on this article, if you could interview Wyndham and Taylor, we could do the entire Rotunda clan, and we could also include like what it meant to them to have Mike as a father and Blackjack as a grandfather and Barry as an uncle, and how that set them along on the path to becoming pro wrestlers and what they envisioned for their future." That article was written and ready to go in March. It was about 4,000 words long. And then Wyndham Bray was out of WrestleMania for a reason that went undisclosed. They told me I was not allowed to say anything. And it was sitting there until Bray made his return, which never fully came to fruition. And unfortunately, as we all know what happened. And then David Shoemaker said, "Hey, we need a special tribute to Bray. We need it as soon as possible." And I said, "Well, we've got the history of the Wyndham Rotunda clan in their own words sitting there. So to make a long story short, that is the piece that got condensed and cannibalized to create the making of Bray Wyatt."
Okay.
Yeah, and there were 4 editors in the document at the same time saying, let's move this here, add this here, and there we go. So that's how that piece came to be.
Wow. Let me ask you this. Have you ever considered working for a magazine? I mean, like Inside the Ropes, or another, maybe a big company that publishes articles. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard of Craig Peters. He was PWI guy for quite a few years. Have you heard of him?
If I have the references escaping me at the moment.
Okay, well, he worked at PWI. He worked with Bill Apter and other folks there, Stu Sachs. They would have to write like 3 articles a day back then.
Yeah.
For all these magazines they had. And it seems like you're really good, at writing and coming up with thoughts in your mind to put on paper. Have you ever considered maybe doing your own thing? Like having your own, magazine, maybe a bi-monthly, I don't know, something like that. I mean, you seem like the type of guy that would probably do really well at that. Have you ever thought of it?
I haven't thought of it. I don't know that I have the confidence to go it alone like that, if I'm being quite honest.
Well, I mean, you have contributing writers, but like people that whatever topic, like wrestling. So you have 4 or 5 other writers, and I know now it's like the big, Impact. It's either WWE, AEW, or Impact now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But maybe something like, I don't know, the independents. The independents are coming back strong, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I have one here. I live in Missouri, Springfield area, Southwest Missouri. And there's a promotion out of Harrison, Arkansas. They come up here every couple months. It's called Midwest States Wrestling, and they put on a fantastic card. Always sold out. Now, it's not no big venue like 10,000 people. It's probably about 700, but I mean, that's a lot for an indie show.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I just thought maybe someday you might consider something like that.
And
I don't know.
Brian, that is a question that is better asked of me when there isn't a 6-month-old in the next room, because it becomes difficult to conceive of having that amount of time ever again. So I know that may be on the horizon, and by that on the horizon, I mean having some free time may be on the horizon in the future, but it feels too distant right now for me to think about.
Well, I'll tell you what, they grow up fast. I mean, my oldest is 32 years old, and my youngest is 26, and I have 4.
Yeah.
A girl and 3 boys, and before
boy.
you know it, they're So, congratulations though on your newborn.
Thank you.
All right, just a couple more questions so you can get back to your Okay, so what are you working on now? Is there any projects in the scoop that you can tell us a little bit about?
Oh, sure. Well, the one that is the project that is, and I don't know that I'm blowing anybody's minds by offering up that Steve Keirn Volume 2 is in the works. I mean, if I'm being, and I'll be completely honest. We had 90% of the material for Keirn Chronicles 2 done before Keirn Chronicles 1 was even printed up. The issue was we needed to lay out the entire arc of his wrestling career from growing up in Tampa to departure from WWE as a trainer. We needed to lay all of that out and determine length of it to figure out where the right point was to separate the two into 2 distinct volumes. So given a month or 2 of refinement, I can have that done and hopefully ready for release sometime in the spring of next year.
Well, that'll be I am going to get Volume 1. I am going to get it. I've read some reviews on it already, and of course, all your books, in my opinion, are great.
Well, thank you.
And I'm not just saying that because you're on here. I think very highly of you. We reached out, and I'm so glad that you were able to come on here and talk about it. It's such great to have a different variety other than a wrestler, a promoter.
Yeah.
It's great to have an author on here that wasn't in the business per se, but does the biographies or helps with the biographies or autobiographies of those wrestlers. And it's great. I'm glad to have you on here. And so
thanks
folks,
for having me.
Oh, yeah. One more time, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ian Douglas, show him some love because he's got a 6-month-old. Go out and get on that keyboard or your computer, order some of his books. The newest one was Steve Keirn. It looks great. I'm going to order one, get it. And any parting words, my friend?
If you really want to support the father of the 6-month-old, the thing with my books is 100% of the money from all of them goes to the wrestler whose name is on the cover. So the only way I'm going to get any money from any book is if you buy Bohemian Rhapsody, the unofficial history of pro wrestling's unofficial territory.
Buy that one.
Yeah, that's okay. The one that will put some beer money in the new dad's pocket.
All right. Well, I will have the description and the links to all of Ian's books down in the description. And one more time, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ian Douglas, thank you for coming on tonight, sir. Really appreciate it.
Brian, thank you so much. I had a blast.
All right, folks, if you're watching, thank you. If you're listening, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And we will talk to you soon.